What if there are financial advisors who have the best interest when it comes to your legacy? I'd like to welcome Andrew Van Alstyne this lovely morning to the Design Your Legacy podcast. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me today.
It is my pleasure. And you're joining today from the East Coast, North Carolina.
Mhm. Yes, just outside of Charlotte.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, would you share a little bit with the listeners about your professional background, your educational background, just to break the ice?
Absolutely. So I'm originally from the Northeast. Graduating high school, I originally thought I wanted to get into engineering. I was very much mathematically and science based, but quickly realized my freshman year that I wanted something that had more of a human element to it. Um, Went a little bit too far in the other direction. Wound up getting my undergrad in criminal justice. Spent some time volunteering in law enforcement. Um, while I was going through college, I wound up in restaurants, wound up making quite a career for myself there, working my way up pretty high into the operational capacities, running multi-million dollar operations. But it wasn't feeding that analytical bug that I had. Went back to Purdue, got my MBA from them. Um, then got licensed as an investment advisor representative, and then started practicing where I'm tucked in under a firm that's based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we take care of clients nationally.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, the restaurant business, you'd have to really like people because they are going to want your attention once doors open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's something that really let me kind of sharpen the sword in that capacity with dealing with people, both from employees that, had the same issues as everyone else, but then, seeing 600 new faces every single night, it really fed that bug for me.
Yeah, yeah. So let's chat about some of the challenges that you're seeing out there in the landscape. I looked
Mhm.
at your Instagram page, and one of your Instagram posts read, rarely do more than three or four variables really count. Everything else is noise. And you're
Mhm.
speaking in the context of investments, obviously.
Mhm.
So, what are the challenges that you're seeing out there? I know you work with next gen family members, affluent families. What
Mhm.
say you?
I think the biggest thing for me, and this is with every socioeconomic level in the United States, I know that we do a poor job at educating people on how to manage their finances. So the biggest challenge that I see is that people don't know where they sit. They're lost afloat at sea. There's no reference point. There's no idea on if they're headed in the right direction, if they're even moving at all or just remaining stagnant. And I think that having the ability to, you had the anchoring bias, and that can be bad when you're talking about a financial strategy. But having something to anchor to as far as philosophy, and knowing that you're tied to a certain goal, and then able to set mile markers up to make sure that you're moving in the right direction, I think is critical. I think that that's something that just about every American is missing in their financial picture.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I know you've talked about how women are coming up, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, but that we are, and we kind of all know this, but we're a society, and it's not just America, but it's globally. Some in more cultures and countries than others, but we're not necessarily comfortable talking about death, taxes, or money. I mean,
Mhm.
people would rather talk about news, sports, and weather, but even this idea that we know that death could be right around the corner and that obviously could rearrange our priorities really quickly,
Yes.
it's still so uncomfortable, but it would be better if we just face it, organize it, compared to walk around like there is this pink elephant in the room because we don't know how to go from point A to point Z, even let alone having the language.
Mhm. No,
Yeah,
that's 100% correct. And it's something where, we have the ability, and again, this is something where it's not solely an American phenomenon, it happens everywhere, but people always want to put off the bad conversation to a later date, the
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 tough
difficult
conversation.
conversations to a later date.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes if you just incorporate it into your daily dialogue, it makes the conversation less difficult.
normalize.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Again, this is just, I think, such an important conversation because the more that even our chatting about this on a podcast can introduce this theme and this almost consent and permission to be able to talk about what it is we don't know.
Mhm.
because I think there's almost like a little bit of a shame or embarrassment. Like, well, I know a lot. I've got my MBA, and yet, and I'm running this company, or I'm doing really well at this job or this investment. And yet, when it comes to someone's, like you had said, personal finances, and even that bridge over to wealth management, like you have to start, with straight and level flight before you start doing Top Gun moves.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something where, with a lot of the families that I deal with and a lot of the conversations that I have, people always come to me under the initial premise that they're excluding their children from the conversation of the legacy that they're looking to create.
Mm,
But what that creates, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit as well, but what that creates with the second generation is that when all of a sudden they have whatever form of capital thrust upon them, they have no idea where it came from, what it took to obtain that, and what they're supposed to be doing with it. It's putting a plethora of unknowns onto that next generation rather than incorporating them and involving them in conversations at a much earlier age.
yeah, I think, and I'm going to move on to the next question in a moment, but I think one of the drawbacks is their parents might have not had that conversation. So you're asking them
Exactly.
to
Mm-hmm.
be parents. Yeah. So if I can think about my parents, they're in their 70s, and some of the conversations I've had with them about legacy, they've said to me, my parents never talked to us about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a lot where it's the fact that they never had exposure to it. So, it's one of those things where you just have to figure it out the same way that we did. Um, it's also not wanting to admit the inevitable for themselves that
Sure, sure.
eventually there's going to be one day that they aren't here,
Correct.
and they think they're doing everything correctly to set their children, their loved ones up for success when they're really doing a disservice by not just owning the inevitable.
Sure, sure. Better to process and face it than to avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of generational wealth, and I don't know the statistics from top of mind for this conversation for this moment, but I think that it's like $1 trillion is going to be passed in like the next 5 years or something, from
Mm-hmm.
one generation to another in that transfer of wealth. So, what's important to speak about? Like, if you could think of three areas, would it be around the terminology, the capacity to know that the next generation needs to handle this? And skills? Is it like, again, what are three areas that could, like, if you could start out an affluent family?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing is to, if your ultimate goal is to leave a legacy, is to create generational wealth, and it's okay if that's not your goal. There are plenty of people that want their last check to bounce and let their kids to figure it out on their own. That's their prerogative. They're allowed to do that. But I think if you're looking to create a legacy and generational wealth, um, is understanding. I think the first thing that you need to do is understanding that there's actually five basic forms of capital. There's spiritual, social, intellectual, human, and financial capital. Financial capital doesn't come until the end. So capital, that doesn't even necessarily need to be about religious. It just needs to have a common agreement with your loved ones within your family, that everyone is working in syncopation with one another. Not that you're in perfect alignment and agreeing on everything, but you have a general understanding. There's norms within the family.
Sure. And let me
Then
interrupt
was
for a moment. I think it's
Yeah.
also what you're pointing to is that there's something bigger to
Mm-hmm.
be shared. It's not just, do I have my luxury car out in the garage or the driveway? Do I have
Correct.
mine?
Correct.
Did I get mine?
It needs to be based off of a bigger purpose than the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, the money, as quickly as the family may have been able to obtain and grow their wealth, it can leave just as quickly if there's not a shared purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, please go ahead. I just wanted to add that.
But along those same lines as social, that's both internally within the family, being able to have hard discussions, being able to come to an agreement with one another on issues. But it's also the social network that you're creating around there. Are there external mentors to the family that you can have the next generation lean on for various either business ventures or struggles that they may not necessarily feel comfortable or want to bring up with elders within the family? But it's important to have resources both inside and outside the family in a social capacity.
Ah, brilliant, brilliant. Another Instagram post of yours spoke about, this is the quote. Archilochus, is that Greek or Roman? Is that a
Hmm.
philosopher? I don't know. Okay. As the ancient poet, Archilochus, I'm not doing justice to the name here. He said, we don't rise, he or she, I don't know. Okay, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And I
Hmm.
thought this was just so great because one of the things you also pointed out is the next generation coming up, whether that's millennials or Generation Z, it's not just that they're not balancing their checkbook, but there's some very kind of foundational skills that are being skipped over. And it's
Hmm.
one thing if we've got every app on our phone and every calculator on our MacBooks and so forth,
Hmm.
and iPhones, but yet it's there are some foundational things. I mean, and you've even spoke about the value of budgeting
Yeah.
in an age of entitlement. Go ahead.
And it has to be. When you're looking at growth, you have to put systems in place just to have an aspiration to achieve something. If you're not going to put into the work, whatever work that may be, you're never going to achieve it. So you have to make sure that if your goal is to grow and to pass on, that you're constantly revisiting the steps that it's going to take to achieve that. If it's something where you're in the early stages of growing that wealth, running the budget, making sure that you're reviewing your finances regularly, making sure that you're staying on path to hit certain targets along the way. If you're in the multi-generational wealth stage, are you constantly having the conversation so that you have that spiritual capital that I mentioned earlier? Are you passing on intellectual capital and allowing for future growth of capital, but making sure that the next generation is on stage to hold up their end of the bargain on that as well? If you're just going to assume that it's going to happen, you're only setting yourself up for failure. And I think that that's the heart of what that quote means, is that if you're not willing to constantly stay on top of what you're trying to measure, if you're not constantly keeping score, you're going to come off the rails and it's going to result in a critical failure for you and your family and your loved ones.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're pointing to is investing in the human capital, walking
Mm-hmm.
beside them, because there's something to be said to say to the next generation, please rise to the occasion. But if they don't know what that means, they're just going to fumble and fumble and fumble because they don't, no one showed them, you know, a metaphor could be how to tie that shoe, how to bake the cookies in the kitchen. Like if they don't have the recipe and you keep
Mm-hmm.
getting mad at them because their cookies aren't turning out well, that's very hard to then.
Yeah, and you need to make sure that that next generation will still have an appreciation for work. It may not necessarily be, a blue collar job, although it could very well be as well if that's where their passions lie. But they can't just be country club kids. They need to have something that is going to get them out of the bed in the morning and keep them ambitious in life and making sure that they're willing to continue to progress forward as a family and be a contributing member to society.
Yeah, I'm just smiling over here because there's a value to one being able to get their hands dirty
Mm-hmm.
if they need to solve
Mm-hmm.
that problem. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes somebody can't just throw money at something. So one of the things we chatted about in the preamble is the distinctions regarding all the different types of financial advisors out there, and everybody has a first day. So what is the difference between an investment advisor representative and a broker dealer, and why is one better than the other? Just to break it down for the listener.
Yeah. So to me, financial advisors and finding the right financial advisor for you, it's a lot like finding the right religion. There's numerous different philosophies out there. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's more than one way to cross the finish line. My belief, my philosophy, as an investment advisor representative, my boss is my clients. They're the ones that I'm beholden to. They're the ones that I'm accountable to. Um, Broker dealers, they have a company or a firm that they are usually employees of and that they report to. Broker dealers also receive commission from products that are sold, where for me, I'm fee based. So I receive a fee from my clients. Again, it can be blended and depending on the compensation measure, but it's only from the client, which was why they are my boss. I'm not beholden to sell certain products. I'm not beholden to put them into certain positions or certain investment styles that are best suited for my pocket. It's solely for their benefit.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction because a lot of times if we don't follow the money, we might not
Mhm.
understand what is motivating the other individual. Like,
Yeah.
did they get their retainer up front? or are they going to be looking at commissions because that's how they're staying alive and putting food on the table? Yeah, I think it's a very important. And again, we're a culture that doesn't necessarily want to talk about money. So I might not want to
Yep.
say, Andrew, how do you make money off of this? Maybe some people are more forthright than others, but especially all the women coming up, they might be more demure, supportive, and helpful. Not always, but they could be, and that question
Mhm.
could be deemed rude.
And it's something where, and this gets back to what I was saying earlier, where there's no one size fits all for this. If it's something where your natural skills lie in being sensible with your money and you may just need someone to enact trades for you, a broker dealer might be a smart move, especially if you haven't amassed a lot of wealth yet. It may be the right position for you, but it's something where if you want someone, the way I look at things with all my clients is I am going to look at every aspect of their financial life, from investments to income to taxes to legacy building, retirement, anything that money possibly touches, I'm going to be reviewing with my clients to have that much more comprehensive and in-depth look. Um, I want my clients to be my boss. I don't want anything that I'm coming back to them recommending to be because of how it's going to potentially benefit me in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's great guidance. So when you look out at the baseline, the landscape today, what are you finding are some of the biggest financial goals?
I think the biggest goal, and again, this gets back to across all socioeconomic gaps, is not wanting to outlive your financial capital. I think that, you know, planning for retirement, a lot of people tend to seek out financial advisors. I'm a little bit odd where I look to serve individuals that are a little bit earlier in their career cycle or in their life cycle. But a lot of people seek out financial advisors naturally when they're approaching retirement. That gets back to their bobbing at sea in the sea of unknown, where they're looking at the doorstep of, okay, now all this wealth that I've amassed over my working career, is it actually going to be enough? I think that that's a top concern for a lot of people. I think that a lot of individuals, especially those that are looking for lasting legacies for generational wealth, are concerned with how their children are going to continue to build upon their intellectual capital, whether
Yeah,
that's saving for college, planning for college, whether there's endowments left for certain college. I think that that is a big concern as far as what to do in the educational realm, um, and how to best position their family, their kids for future intellectual ventures. Um, but then I think a lot of the things, and a big concern for those that are looking for generational wealth, and I mentioned earlier that they'll oftentimes exclude younger generations from conversations when I first meet them, but they're ultimately concerned that their children, that their loved ones are going to become complacent. They want to set them up so that they're well positioned for success in their life, but they don't want them to squander all of the money and wind up worse off in the long term.
sure,
And
sure.
I think that that's a major concern that a lot of clients have.
Yeah, there's something to be said about hunger. Sometimes that
Mm-hmm.
generation that builds the wealth as entrepreneurs, or even just
Mm-hmm.
two income, two income households, and both individuals had jobs. And so they might not have been business owners per se, but there is that hunger that drives them. And I don't know if it's something that where you make that kid, wash dishes or rake the yard that builds in something within them regarding the love of work and discipline. But you're absolutely right. If somebody doesn't have those survival skills, it can
Mm-hmm.
be twice as hard if they wake up one day and they have to get their hands dirty. Yeah.
And
So,
it's also something, well,
oh,
just to that point, real quick, it's also something where depending on how their financial capital is structured for the transfer, it can almost be burdensome in that capacity where you're passing off this financial capital to the next generation, but it's done so in a sense where you're trying to control it from the grave and they feel handcuffed.
oh, that's a big
They
one.
it becomes more of a burden and an obligation for them to now have to manage that in their daily life rather than something that's going to let them live their life to the fullest as well.
Yeah. My dad once said to me that there's a difference between control and love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes when individuals write trust documents or wills and so forth, it can be written in
Yep.
such a way that what you had just talked about, wings can get clipped because of that
Yep.
worry that that next generation could mess up.
and that gets back even to as far as knowing the different titles and the different responsibilities that people play in your financial picture, where if you're talking about estate planning, people think that the only way for them to show that they're doing work on your behalf in your financial life is by recommending, trusts or complex estate planning, when sometimes keeping things relatively simple, it might not necessarily be the most tax efficient means in the current state, but we also don't know in 10, 15, 20 years what the tax landscape is going to look like. So if we keep it simple, where it's flexible, it's nimble, and again, focus on the now and having conversations.
Yeah, very good advice. Women are posed to play a significant role in the largest transfer of wealth in history today. So, what are some of the questions that they're asking when you, like, whether it's your own clients or within your firm or hearsay, what
Mm-hmm.
is it that you notice that they're asking? Because again, I think sometimes women are going to be bold to ask, and other times they could be shy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest thing is what do I do now? Um, a lot of them feel, well, no, because a lot of women, because this is something that is new, and women are the ones that are going to be largest beneficiary of this transfer of wealth, they almost feel guilty or as if they're a duck out of water, because this isn't a position that anyone in their family or anyone in their close social circle has necessarily been in, or if they have, it hasn't been for an extended period of time.
No, I was just laughing because it's like tossing a set of keys to drive a stick shift, and that woman's never driven a stick before.
Exactly.
And so when
Exactly.
you said, "Oh, what do I do now?"
Yeah. Yeah. And it's taking, and I know I'm going back to where we even started this conversation, but if you take a, a couple even that has lost adrift at sea in the unknown, and you take a woman who has even less of a reference point independently, there's a lot of confusion. And again, that's where some of that burden's coming in the fact that they almost, it's almost a sense of guilt as far as they're in a position that they shouldn't be in, and there
Mm.
should be someone better equipped. And that's not the case.
They can do it,
Most,
but they could be beating themselves up like, "Well, why don't I get this?"
correct,
Yeah.
correct. The other tendency that I see is that, and this is just a natural bias, is women on a grand scale have a tendency to be more risk adverse. So when you're looking for growth, they tend to want to play it a little bit closer to the vest and not necessarily take the same gambles that men do. I have some couples where the male's like, if it was up to me, I would take my retirement savings and go to a casino and put it on black because I can just work the rest of my life and earn it all back. And meanwhile, the wife is sitting there saying, no, I want to keep it in all bonds and fixed income and have something that has a high level of security and a stable return. Um, Neither is necessarily the right answer. A lot of that is also dependent on as far as the goals and aspirations and what you're looking to achieve. But those are just some of the early conversations that are had as far as where we're working through on things.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you. I think a part of it has to be also a little bit cultural because women don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily go to the coffee shop or Starbucks or wherever and say, "Let's talk about taxes, ladies."
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I also in military intelligence, men are motivated by respect as well as fear, but women are motivated by fear and security. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they don't need to have like respect commanded when they walk into a room. It's,
Mm-hmm.
do I have to worry?
Yep.
Will I be
The,
safe of that lion or that bear outside the front door? Whatever
yep.
that metaphorical bear is today. Okay. Would
Mm-hmm.
you share any success stories of what you've seen, whether it's your own clients or an affluent family or even within your own family, just somebody that's planned well in the context of their legacy?
I think the biggest one that is referenced, and a concept that I use with a lot of affluent clients as far as the family bank, um, I think that Mayor Armstrong Rothschild, um, he had a banking house in Germany. What he did with all of his sons was, rather than just let them work in the family business locally, is he had each of his sons open up a branch of the bank in other countries within Europe. And then what they would do on a frequent basis, and I can't remember if it was quarterly or at least annually, is they would all get together and share and this is the sharing of the intellectual capital. They would share best practices that they all learned from these separate branches. It also gave all of the sons a sense of ownership within what they did. Um, and that's something that is a great representation that I try to discuss with a lot of clients as far as giving that next generation ownership in whatever it is that they do. Something more local, a family name that is well known in the United States. The Rockefellers embodied a lot of that same process here, as far as taking generations and giving them the resources, the financial capital, that last bit, to then create the more important capitals, the human, the social, and the intellectual capital by going out into different ventures. Um,
Sure. I
so
think,
those are two stories that I try to share with a lot of my clients.
yeah, that's wonderful. I think a lot of times when there is that seed capital from that family bank, it
Mm-hmm.
then allows that next generation to see their ideas come to fruition sooner.
Mm-hmm. It,
Yeah,
it's it's something that I find critical because what it allows is it allows the younger generation to not necessarily get into debt through external banking
sure.
at a young age. It also allows the older generation, as they're looking to siphon off as far as in their elder years, to de-risk their investment portfolio by having a family interest rate. Um, but then what it also does is it allows them to take ventures outside of the family business.
Sure, sure.
Whatever the family has done to amass wealth probably isn't going to be relevant. It may be in the second generation, but most likely won't be by the third. So you need to constantly reinvent yourself and take those calculated risks. And anytime that these younger generations are going to pull money from the family bank, putting together a prospectus as far as how this money is going to be put to use, what the return on this investment is going to be, it better prepares them for the business world as well.
Absolutely. And why pay 15 to 25% to Visa or MasterCard if you don't have to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What does the word legacy mean to you personally? What would you like your legacy to be?
The biggest thing for me, and some of this is what I just touched on. I have two young kids. Um, for them right now, I'm a little biased in my views on it, but I'm trying to teach them uh, good financial practices even at their young age. My daughter's turning 6 in August, but even with her, she has her own balance book for little either gift money that she gets for different holidays and birthdays, or whether it's small chores around her house. But she runs her own balance sheet, um, just to keep track and get that. Not saying that she understands why she's doing it yet. Right now, it's just a fun game and practice, but instilling that intellect into her. Um, it's that spiritual component that we were talking about earlier for my legacy, where I want them to understand that at the end of the day, whatever it is that they do, they have to be good people. They don't need to go into my business. Even I come from a family. My mother was in education. My father was in law enforcement as well. My grandfather was a Marine. Serving others is of critical importance to me. It's part of the fabric of what makes me me, and I hope that that is the legacy that I'm looking to pass off to my children. Um, and then if we're working, if I'm going to jump down to the last piece of capital, that financial capital, is just equip my kids and their families with the ability to really sink their teeth into whatever they're passionate about, and make a life out of it.
Yes. I'm almost hearing that your definition of legacy is being able to cover those five pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's critical. If you focus only on one, it's like trying to set a table up. If you don't have every leg of the table down, it's going to collapse in on itself. So it's important to have at least an understanding of where you sit on every pillar of the.
yeah, brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also hearing values around family and service to others
Mhm.
and being honorable.
Yeah, it's and I don't try to stand on a soapbox to say that everyone needs to have the same values as me. To me, it's something that's important. I think that a rising tide raises all ships. I think that the better that you can position others, it only better positions yourself and even their external network as well. Um, and if embodied at least a small fraction of that, I think that we would be in a great place as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think family is a core foundational element to any uh, society and their social fabric. And I think that it can be invested in. It's just going to make the country stronger, whatever country that is, compared
Hmm.
to the breakdown of family that we see sometimes, especially today, the next generation. I mean, you know, yeah. Anyways, so so what would you say would be your top 3 or 4 values if you were to give them language? I know I was kind of throwing out a couple of ideas, but what do you
Yeah.
think?
I would think that it would be kind to others. Um, be willing to take calculated risks. I think there's far too many people that want to just play it safe. And I think that there's importance in managing risk. But if you take no risk at all, you're going to become sedentary and die. Um, I think that you have to constantly evolve and continue to learn. I think that that's important. I think not only academically, but just be a student of life and continue to learn, and remain active physically and mentally. And I think that that ties in with the intellect a little bit. But I think that by remaining active, there's too many people that I've seen, especially as you start to garner more wealth. They stop moving as much because now they have a desk job where before they may had to have been on the road or traveled, or now they changed their diet because of now being able to afford finer meals. But I think staying active, I think that that's critical because otherwise, this legacy that you're looking to do, if you're shortening your life expectancy through changing lifestyle habits, it's never going to be fulfilled because you're not going to be around to share all that you've gained in your life.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is that stage of their life when they were paying their dues.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then they make it, and then it's that question of regarding and around personal agency of will they continue to grow forward or will they actively grow backwards because
yeah.
they
It,
get too
it, it's
comfortable.
there's plenty of people that just reach a certain stage and they just flip a switch and say, okay, that chapter of my life is done and I don't want to even think about it anymore. But you have to be cognizant of it. It's what got you to where you are. And if you're not aware that that is something that is still there, yes, if you had to go back, could you still be comfortable? Possibly, but it can also fuel the fire as far as fueling additional growth into the future.
Yeah, wonderful. If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month to design a hardcover coffee table book, what images or stories or lessons would be in its pages as we wrap?
Um, I think a lot for me would be my willingness. The stories in there would be my willingness, and this gets back to my operational days, to really help others. You know, there were times when I had staff of over 200 employees that directly reported to me. But it was really caring for each one of those. And this even goes before I started my own family with my wife, is treating all of them as if they were brothers, sisters, or children of my own and wanting them to truly have a better life. Not just simply come in, perform a task and go home at the end of the day, but really positioning them where they can live out more of the goals that they had in life. I'm not saying that were able to accomplish all of them, but it's something where I want them to be better off than they came to me when they were looking for employment. Um,
So it sounds like your hardcover coffee table book might have been those moments where you lived into your values, whether that was the restaurant business, the financial industry, etc.
yeah, I think that, you know, those values, and I think that this is why values are important to everyone. I think values are what really kind of steer you when you don't have a clear sense of direction. It's something that gives you meaning and gives you purpose, and it's something that can help you get to the next step that you need to take.
Lovely, lovely. What's the best website before I read my closing paragraph if a listener would like to learn more?
Uh, Best website for me is forfiduciary.com/meet Andrew Van Alstyne. That would be the best way to reach me directly.
Oh, that's lovely. Before I read my closing paragraph again, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for being a guest. I thought that you brought up some great key points, and we started with the intention of what if there are financial advisors who have the best interest for your legacy. And I think that we've covered a number of key points around that, whether it's building upon intellectual capital generation after generation, whether it's being willing to be more risk or to take more risks compared to being risk averse. And also the concept of a family bank. A lot of times families don't realize that they don't have to go to the bank. They
Mm-hmm,
themselves
mm-hmm.
can keep that capital in-house and multiply it and help the next generations, including cousins, nieces, nephews, etc., to build, just like you had given the example of well-known family businesses throughout history that are still standing today. So thank
Mhm.
you so much for your contribution.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on financial topics.
Wonderful. In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, but international in those I coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. Thank you so much for joining us today. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Leave a review, a rating, share with your family and friends. And most of all, thank you to Andrew for speaking into your life.